Standing up in McKinney. This is According to Callus. Episode 675, coming to you on the 5th of August, the year of our Lord 2024. And, we're just going to go with stepping out, right? That's going to be the title for today. We've got a couple of different things that we need to address. And when I say we, I mean me. After all, the entire show is basically a monologue. And at some point, maybe I'll figure out how to put some clips in here that make things a little more spicy. Certainly, I'm not one to waste time whenever I can avoid it. One of the reasons why I don't do video, quite frankly, is it's a whole lot of time investment for, I'm not sure, a whole lot of payoff. Though I am being swayed that there is a benefit, perhaps a benefit that I'm not aware of, but we will get to that at some point, I'm sure. Okay, before we get into the program, let me remind you, the only thing we can do in the negative world that we live in is to accept it and fight back. And the way we fight back is we understand that alternate or alternative voices, opinions, media will be blocked, will be shadow banned, will be disfavored in algorithms. There's no sense getting upset about it. There's no sense pitching a fit. You get what you get, right? We make the best of it, and we just think smart, act smart, and take the actions we can to overcome that. That being said, you can like, share, subscribe, follow this program anywhere you would like. I would appreciate it if you would be kind enough to follow me on the social media of your choice. That's right. You can join me on Facebook. I've got a group and a page. I am a pro at Gab, and I still drop in at MeWe. And while we're at it, YouTube has not banned the show. There are shows that are missing, but that is, that's just the price we pay. Okay. Here we go. On with the program. All right. So as you well know, one of the struggles I have is I want to stay local. I want to focus on things that happen in Collin County, McKinney, particularly. But I feel like the best way to approach it is from the state level down, right? We don't typically spend too much time talking about things that are going on outside of the state or, in the world at large, because we really can't affect or change anything that's going out there. We do have, and when I say we, I mean you, I, and anyone that's listening to me has some tiny input of what goes on at the state level. We have a much better opportunity to affect change at the county, city, or school board level. But we have to be smart, and we have to be active, and we have to consider, are there some fights that aren't worth taking up at the moment? It doesn't mean that they're not invaluable. It doesn't mean that it's not a valuable fight. It doesn't mean that it's not an important fight. That's what happens when you try and merge two ideas together. It doesn't mean that there's nothing there. It just means that one thing at a time. When I talk about one thing at a time, I look at the idea or the notion that sometimes one victory turns into a catalyst for another victory. Sometimes you have to do the groundwork on various things before you can expect a victory. One of the things that I would suggest is we need to be able to distinguish between friend and not friend. Now, there are we'll call them a significant handful of folks that live in my county that I think see anybody that isn't them as a not friend or as an enemy. And I think that's a huge error. I think it's a mistake that's going to only hurt our efforts, but I can't convince them otherwise. Okay? And to illustrate that we're going to take an example of something that's going on in another state. Why? Because we can. But it also shows how that matters, right? So apparently, Kari Lake, running for the U.S. Senate in Arizona, apparently her opponent, a Democrat representative, has announced a coalition of dozens of Republican and independent Arizona leaders supporting him. What I don't understand here is, if you're a Republican, I thought the first message that we all got is there's this 11th commandment, right? You don't speak ill or you don't work against other Republicans. And every time we hear it, it has to do with those of us on the right, those of us in the Tea Party, those of us who are, not part of the establishment, right? There's that word. I was trying to think if I could come up with a better word. But those of us that are articulating something that is more than what most Republicans are comfortable with, right? We're the bleeding edge, if you will. We're supposed to suck it up and support whatever the Republican nominee is. We're supposed to work to get those folks elected. So none other than Kari Lake, who I believe has a legitimate claim that her election was stolen by Katie Hobbs. I know there's, no court case that proves it, but come on, we're not that stupid. I mean, you can, depending on your locale, you can get a court to do a lot of different things because there's a lot of political courts. Now, I would like to say that we expect better. I would like to say that it should be better. And I think in many, many cases, that is the case, right? You've got a judge that goes hands off, that stays as apolitical as possible. And keep in mind, nobody is apolitical, but they're neutral. They're supposed to be objective. And I think the vast majority of judges do that, which is why we have to deal with the bad actors, right? The so-called bad apples. So when I look at the notion of a bad apple, right, we have, let's say, a very good chance of winning our 2024 election with a Republican president. Now, he was not my first choice in 2016. He was the only choice we had in 2020. And quite frankly, not only was the only choice, he was the best choice in 2024. And we still have these so-called never-Trumpers running around pretending that they're Republicans, when in fact, almost all of them are neocons. They're frauds. They try and hijack. Maybe that's too strong a word. Now we're going to use it. They try and hijack the party and the principles and what we stand for. Interestingly enough, Donald's team, the Trumpsters, at the Republican National Convention, did the same thing in reverse. I mean, they legitimately watered down some, primary issues for a lot of us conservatives, a lot of us liberty-oriented people out there. I know why they did it. To a degree, I'm not surprised. I'm disappointed. We can win without caving on these issues, but that's where we're at. So then when I look over in Arizona, and we've got what I would call Kari Lake, the Trumpy candidate out there, the very same people that have been preaching us decades to support the nominated Republican candidate, regardless of what your personal feelings were, are doing the exact opposite. They're selling us out. Now, what's interesting here is a good number of these folks that she's got listed here are former representatives and former this and former, and then a McCain person. Okay, well, that explains everything that you need to know there. But, at once upon a time, there was a certain amount of respect that we might have had for John McCain. But he sold us out because he was a neocon. He unveiled himself for what it is. And the crazy thing is that there's actually, quote unquote, a movement of Republicans for Harris. Well, I would like to know what exactly Republican out there would want to claim to support Harris. I mean, I can think of any number of reasons why you would not want to support Harris, even if you hated the Donald. I get it. You don't like the Donald? Fine. But to join and support Harris? I mean, objectively, Harris is terrible in many, many ways. So I'm kind of at a loss. But again, this plays out everywhere over everything, right? We on the right, we're supposed to suck it up. We're supposed to just go along with whoever the nominee is. But clearly, some of those former leaders, some of those people that have been preaching that for decades, they don't feel that they're held to that same standard. Why do I bring this up? I was talking to an individual over the weekend, and they said, well, I ran across somebody that I've known for quite some time, and they're conservative, they're a good Republican, but they immediately told me that they cannot support Donald because, well, he's been convicted. He's a felon now. I'm like, yeah, but their felony convictions were more or less overturned, and there was a stacked jury in a corrupt court, so I'm not really sure. I mean, that just sounds like an excuse, quite frankly. And the same person indicated, well, they can't support Cruz because Cruz supports Trump. So now we're going to go one person removed? I got to say, it's, to me, not only disappointing, it's, at this point, not surprising. Right? These so-called leaders that we have, they didn't get their way, so they immediately abandoned ship. I suspect it's really about their control or their power, but we're the ones that are supposed to, just go along. I don't understand. And I don't understand why we consider this normal or why we tolerate it. But here's where we transition. This is where I'm going to make the distinction. Clearly, this is a situation where we have a friend, not friend paradigm, right? So it should be evident at this point that people that work against you, they stab you in the back, are not your friend. Now, they might be an ally. They might be somebody that you need to work with from time to time, but you don't trust them. You don't count on them. They're not your friend. So I finally got into reading the Stephen Wolfe book. And what's funny is Pastor talked about Aaron Renn's book, right, is Life in the Negative World. So I've got that next up in the queue. I typically, just in case you're wondering, I typically try and put a nonfiction book, or I should say, in between my nonfiction books, I try and put in a fiction book, because when you got some heavy reading, you need something to lighten things up, or at least mix things up a little bit. If I wanted to be reading textbooks all the time, or textbook-like books, then I'd go to school so you get credit for it. But I got to say, you can't expand your mind. You can't understand some of the things going on if you don't read those nonfiction books. So that being said, the idea is nominally that people are on your side if they agree with you. But can somebody be a friend even if they don't necessarily agree with you? See, I touched base on this last week a little bit. To me, it's real simple. You have friends and you have allies. And allies and friends can sometimes be the same thing, but not always. If you look to the example of World War II, I think the vast majority of the American Army leadership or Navy leadership fully understood that the Russian communists were as bad or worse than the Nazi socialists that we were fighting. But they needed to make that deal to beat the Nazi socialists because we were working with the red communists of the Soviet Union. I don't think they trusted them. I don't think there was ever any idea that we were legitimately on the same team. We just had a common goal, right? And I think sometimes that gets missed. The alleged Republican leaders that are quote unquote supporting Harris or working against Donald or working against Kerry. And look, I'm not under any illusion that Kerry Lake is perfect. nor is Donald Trump. But they are the nominee. And based upon everything I've ever heard in the 50 plus years I've been walking around and paying attention to politics, well, okay, I haven't been paying attention for 50 plus years. Let's say 40 plus years. You're supposed to support the person that's on your team. You're supposed to support your allies, your friends. We have a common enemy, quote unquote, right? So if we're going to be sold out by these folks, what is going on here? Why? Well, therein lies the rub. There are different motivations for different people. And how does that work? What does that matter? Well, you know what? Again, I think at this point in time, we would all be just wise to understand we're in a negative world. The world doesn't like us. It doesn't support us. It doesn't want us to have our say. And that's how we should approach everything. And that means that when we pick our friends, pick our allies, we need to be careful about what we trust them with until they prove themselves. Now, look, I've often said that, when I work with people, I will treat them as they're a friend, or I will trust them until they prove that they can't be trusted or they're not a friend. And maybe that's not the best choice. Maybe that's a shortcoming that I have, and I need to work past that, or I need to adjust that. Maybe. But I'm going to suggest to you that if you're going to work in a life and do life and be political in life, you can't hate everybody. You can't not trust everybody. You can't see everybody as an enemy. So that's an equally negative way to go at that. That's an equally detrimental way to look at everything. So you can run the risk of being burned and hurt, or you can have nobody in your life. I think I know which way I'm going to go. But again, this is going down to the notion of friend, not friend. There are many people that we'll work with, or many people that we deal with, that say they're good conservatives, say they're good Republicans, say they're good Christians, but they routinely disappoint us. They routinely change tacks. They knuckle under. Ladies and gentlemen, that's normal. We need to expect it. And I think if we start behaving like we legitimately live in a fallen world and we need to do the best that we can to fight for what's right and what's good, and understand that, one, even the people that say they agree with us don't necessarily always agree with us, and two, the people that we trust, like, consider friends, are going to let us down, and we shouldn't lose sleep over it. We just got to understand that's the way it is. Even people that we've known for years or trusted for years, they're not perfect. That being said, this also requires a certain amount of being able to not take things personally. Now, I will tell you personally, the last 10, 12 years have been politically taxing and challenging. There have been a number of people that have let me down. I would even go so far as to say there's some people that have betrayed me. Now, they would say that they had reasons, legitimate or otherwise, but why get upset? Why be mad? Now, the simplest, easiest thing to do is just not deal with them any further, right? To just understand that they can't be trusted, to understand that their ego or their objective got in the way of whatever you guys are working on together. Okay, that's fine. And this is kind of a coping mechanism, right? But you have to understand this in order to go forward, that some people are friends and some people are not. And just because they're not friends doesn't mean they can't be allies, doesn't mean you can't partner with them, doesn't mean you can't have shared common goals. You just need to keep that in mind. You need to keep that in mind. Okay, I think I've beat a dead horse here. Okay, the second aspect of this, right? If you're stepping out to do things, you got to determine whether this is work or not work. What do I mean by that? You have to see the outcome to determine whether or not something you did worked, whether it was a net positive, whether there was a benefit gained from that. And if you continue to do the same thing and it's not giving you a positive outcome, it does not work. It doesn't matter what we like, what we think, what we desire. If it's not giving you an outcome, it's not working. Okay, so let me give you a couple of quick examples on this. There is a reason why people block walk. Now, you can argue whether or not it's highly effective or whether it's just a good investment. But the fact of the matter is it makes a difference. It can change an outcome. One-on-one interaction with people works. So then the next thing on the item, or the next item on the agenda, right? Because we're talking politics here, right? Brass tacks. What's going to convince somebody that's not certain on what they think? You know, the middle. There is a middle that exists. Now, whether they're 10 or 25% of the population, I don't really know. And on certain issues, it might be as high as 40, right? They just don't have a strong opinion on it one way or the other. But the best way that you do that is the interaction. So you could do the block walk. You can do the coffee thing, right? The sit down, the 1-on-1 or the 1-on-10 meeting, you know, a little group get together. These are all effective things, but you can tell at a certain point whether it's going to work or not work, because every location is different. Every group of people is different. And if people are openly hostile, man, just stop. You're not going to help yourself. In fact, you may hurt yourself. If people are ambivalent, maybe you change tact. You would address issues differently. So I saw something on the news here, right? I guess courtesy of Microsoft, and 20 Christian beliefs being imposed on Americans. It's a pretty catchy title, right? So this kind of goes into the idea of work, not work. So apparently the pro-life movement is a Christian thing. So I guess that means not murdering people is a Christian thing. And I think that most people can wrap their head around that not murdering other people is a good thing. Whether or not it's Christian, it's a good thing, right? It just seems to be blatantly obvious to me, but apparently that's a negative thing. I don't get it. And apparently traditional marriage was also forced on us. But again, that's something that works. If the idea is to procreate and grow a community, traditional marriage works. The other stuff does not. Interestingly enough, that's a terrible thing. Oh, and another one, religious freedom. Personally, and anti-euthanasia. In other words, we don't want to kill people. Wow, this is stupid, terrible article. I'm sorry. I'm not even going to fit. I'm sorry. I'm not even going to go any further on this. This is just awful. Awful. Hello, positive mindset apparently is the. Wow, what a joke, what drivel, right? But the thing is, things work, and if they work, we should support them. We should be adequately able to define what they are and why they're beneficial. This works with any political position as well as any political movement and any political action, but it also works in life as well, right? If something's not working, you stop doing it. The corollary being, the idea of, okay, I will freely admit I got distracted and I rambled a little bit on this issue. But I'm going to give you a more prescient or a more direct example. And I know that listeners of this program already know where I'm going to go. The Republican Party, for better or for worse, has determined that we want to endorse in municipal elections. We have 3 election cycles that have proven to be a negative outcome. That is, we have lost the majority of the races we've endorsed in. And we've now received feedback that many of these candidates, or I shouldn't say many, several of these candidates don't even want an endorsement. In fact, they're rejecting an opportunity to get an endorsement. That alone should be evidence, but 3 losing cycles should be more than enough evidence. So while we like the idea, while it's something that we wanted to do, we have significant proof that it doesn't work. This is where you stop, which goes back to where I was going to quote Einstein, right? The definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result. And I guess he gets credit for it. I don't know whether or not he was the first one to say it. But the idea is, if it doesn't work, stop. But if it is working, perhaps it'd be useful to figure out why it works and what was different there. It is useful, again, to utilize the same example. See, I had somebody that pointed out, well, it worked in one city, so it should work in every city. Well, sure. But when you're dealing with a town that has, say, sub 50,000 people, and the percentage of people that are Republican or quote-unquote conservative or quote-unquote Christian in that area is north of 65%, then yes, putting a Republican endorsement on there makes a huge difference. But if you live in a city that's, say, over 100,000, and at best 52 or 55% of the people that live there are Republican, right? They have an R after their name. That may or may not help you. In fact, in that close of an election, it's driven primarily by turnout, and the Republican Party has not done a very good job of getting turnout out. That's another issue that we need to address. But it does, in fact, motivate those that oppose Republicans to get out and vote. It ends up being a net negative. And the fact that that's lost on the people that are making these decisions is extremely disappointing. This is yet another example where something doesn't work, so you stop it. So you go back to what works. I mean, and I use politics because this is just the simplest thing, because I'm caught up in the middle of repeated drama on these very issues. And the application is the same in your, real life, right? Your business life, your family life. If something's not working, you stop doing it. If something is working, you try and figure out why it works or what makes it successful and do more of that in different areas. It shouldn't be that hard, but here we are. All right. I think I put enough time into that one as well. So I guess this is a slightly different direction. How much time? And this is kind of a very broad question. But it requires that you kind of think about couple of different things here. So how much time do you give to determine whether or not something or someone is a friend or not a friend? Now I would suggest to you that my evidence of that would be until they betray you or until they prove themselves. Now here's the question: how do they prove themselves? I would say when they take direct action that works against what was previously thought of as a common goal. I would say that the premise that once bitten, you need to be a whole lot more careful. Now, I routinely work with people in the political world that I would just call finicky or fickle. Not to be confused with Pickle, because he's a good guy. And I supported him multiple times to run for judge. Nope, Jim Pickle's entirely different than fickle. There was a great number of people that were anti-Trump until they were pro-Trump. And I'm fairly certain that you would probably want to lump me in there as well. It wasn't so much that I was anti-Trump. It was I didn't know where he was coming from. And I was really nervous about his policies. And I can say that with no hesitation in 2020 there was support. In fact, I was glad to support him. 2024, it's going to be the same thing. But 2016, we had other options. We had legitimate options. We had, in retrospect, maybe they weren't better options, but they were other options. So the thing is I was never a never Trumper. I was a preference for a couple other guys, including Rand Paul. But that ship sailed. We don't have another significant option. But if somebody else is still, hurt over the fact that Donald won, or go so far as to work against them because they don't like the guy, well, they're the problem. You don't need any more evidence. The time is over, right? You that's a one-time deal. But what if you got other situations, right? And I'm keeping this in the context of politics because, quite frankly, nobody wants to talk about real life. They don't want to really talk about jobs and careers and education, all that stuff. They like the stuff that they don't believe affects them. Things that, we don't mess around with this. But I'm here to tell you, once again, you cannot care about politics, but politics certainly cares about you. So, how much time? Well, this directly relates to the previous thing as well, right? How many times or how much time do you invest into trying to do something to determine that it's not working? Right? So the friend, not friend is a lot easier. And it depends on what's at stake as well. But when you're talking about a policy or an action, how much time? Well, I think that's going to be different because sometimes, I'm going to use another word here. Hang on a second. The phrase, it depends, comes to mind. Again, I'm stealing that from somebody else completely. It depends, right? How critical is it? How clear is it? And what's at stake? Which would also be kind of a combination of those previous two. And I would suggest to you that we have to be flexible. We have to be understanding that sometimes preference isn't going to get you the answer you want. Sometimes the ideal is the opposite of the good, right? Ideally, we think that making endorsements is going to make a difference. And then we find out, really it doesn't. So yeah, that's not good. That's the opposite. Losing is not good. Okay, I guess a final extrapolation here. And I think it'd be fair to say that this is a bit of a stretch to make this episode out of these thoughts, but bear with me for just a few more minutes here. The reason why I want to talk about friend and not friend, and what works and what doesn't work, we're dealing with a situation where my party, the Republican Party of Collin County, and to a lesser extent the Republican Party of Texas, is now in the hands primarily of the Tea Party people, right? Those of us that got involved, some of us predate that, right? Ron Paul people, they got involved in, say, 2008, 2012. The Tea Party folks came in or came online probably 09, 10, maybe, depending on who you talk to, maybe as late as 2012. Or maybe as early as 2007. Again, it's all different depending on where you are and how that applies. But we have an enormous amount of influence in this party. I will safely tell you that no, we don't run it, especially at the national level. But here in Collin County, it is the Tea Party people that pretty much run the party. And I'm flabbergasted at the Johnny-come-latelys that call us the establishment, work against us, see every little thing we've done as somehow undermining the grassroots. We are the grassroots. We came from the grassroots. But we also understand that sometimes there's a little compromise that has to be made. Sometimes there's a little change of action that needs to be done to get things done, to win the battle. Because quite frankly, a lot of it doesn't matter if you don't win. Now, we can go into that purity circle that I've referred to in the past, the circular firing squad if you prefer, and we can continue to fight amongst ourselves on who's the best representative of what it means to be a good conservative, what it means to be the best Christian Republican. You can do all of that. You can. But realistically, if you don't win, it doesn't matter. So yeah, maybe you ran a candidate that was 10 or 5% better than the previous person, right? The incumbent. Or maybe it was an open seat and you got into a battle royale with your team, your party, because you wanted somebody that was nominally more conservative, but knew nobody, had no money. You lost. So let me ask you, is that a net gain or a net loss? Sure, your candidate was perhaps slightly more conservative or slightly more Christian or slightly more whatever, but they lost. It doesn't matter how good your candidate is in your mind of thinking on principles or policies if they can't win. Now, I'm also aware of the other ditch there, right? You get a guy like, we're going to use Dade Phelan because I'm going to be nice to my own state reps. You get a guy like Dade Phelan in there. He's got an R after his name. He's got tons of money. He's slightly right of center, maybe. But he routinely sells us out, routinely does whatever he needs to do to feather his own nest. So yeah, in that situation, you have to run somebody against him, even if they can't win, which the guy that ran against him came awfully close to beating him. But there are times where you're forced. You have no choice. It's an action of last resort. But I'm here to suggest to you that it would be much better plan if rather than beating up on, I don't know, we'll call them the moderates, the establishment, we spent all of our time going after the wackadoo leftists that somehow get elected to school boards and somehow get elected to city councils. If we were to focus our ire on them instead of the people that are at least nominally on our team, and go to those people that are at least nominally on our team and say, look, we don't necessarily like all the things you're doing here. We're not enthusiastic about that, but these crazy leftist progressive socialists, they got to go. We're going to run somebody that's going to be to the right of you. We're going to run somebody that maybe makes you slightly uncomfortable. But here's the deal. We're not going to attack you. We're not going to go after you. In fact, we're going to find ways to work with you as long as you'll work with us so we can get rid of this crazy influence in our city. This negative outcome that's come about because we were too busy fighting amongst ourselves and we let this person in. The same thing can be done at school board level as well. Now, I'm blessed. I live in Collin County. I have arguably the best. I won't even argue about it. We have the best commissioner's court in the state of Texas. They make good decisions. They plan well. They do a lot of things. Are they perfect? No. Nobody's perfect. But even they are stuck with a situation where the taxes are going up again. Now, we could lose sleep over that. We could fret over it. We can understand that that's just the situation we're in and it stinks. And perhaps there should be some more austerity. Perhaps there's some things we could do differently. But I don't think we, the people, would be better served by that, quite frankly. I don't think we, the people, benefit by cutting back on legitimate service the county needs to provide because I got to tell you, our counties run well enough and tight enough that they're not really doing a lot of extra fluff. They're not wasting money on things. And we live in a great county, and I'm happy to say that, but if you live in any number of the 253 other counties in Texas, you maybe can't say that. Now, there's probably some that can. Maybe some that even quibble that their county's as good or better than mine. you're wrong. But that's what works. We ran good conservatives. We made sure we had a good, clean race. We did things right. And we were successful. And we should look at what we did there and apply it and adapt it to reflect on those municipal races. The city council, the school board races, right? And some people think that the way to fix it is going partisan races. And I got to say, if you would have asked me 5 years ago, I would have said, yeah, absolutely, that's the way to go. But after the last 5 years, I'm not sure. I'm not sure that's going to fix it. Now, there are advantages to it, for sure. Maybe you make it optional. I don't know. Perhaps if we move the city council and school board races to November with the rest of the partisan races, we get some more interesting results. But the other thing you need to keep in mind here is there's an entirely different group of motivations for how people vote on the municipal level than how they vote at even the county or the state level. And are really sure you want to open up that can of worms and put in competing interests and mess with the outcome that we've been blessed with here in Texas. Another case of be careful what you wish for. Again, I don't know 100% what the correct answer is, what the right way is to do things, but I'm willing to have that conversation. I'm open-minded enough to look at evidence to suggest these things. And what I really need is people that are on my team to grasp the idea or the notion that maybe they don't know everything. Or maybe if they do know something doesn't mean it translates to everything. And certainly they don't know that they're always right, because they're not always right. Nobody's always right. Well, nobody on earth is always right. How about that? We have to find a way. We have to determine who our friends are. We have to determine what works. And then we have to adjust and take action based upon the feedback on that and the amount of time we invested in it. And I hope that the last, 5-10 minutes here was worth the time that you invested for the first 30 minutes. I appreciate your willingness to forgive that. As I say, listen to my sponsor. Go buy something from Texian Pride. I think they got some really great t-shirts there. Check it out. And with that, this has been According to Callus, and I will see you on the other side.
For all your Texas fashion tees, it's TexianPride.com. Whether you're out honky-tonkin' in Austin, bucking Broncos in Fort Worth, or strolling the San Antonio Riverwalk, Texian Pride is here for you. Support a Texan-owned business and show off your love for Texas with style. Visit TexianPride.com for your next fashionable Texas tee.